Hey, hockey fans. Welcome to the Idiots Talk Sports podcast. I'm your host, Keegan. I'm joined by Eric, and we are going to recap today Game 2 of the Stanley Cup Finals between the Washington Capitals and the Vegas Golden Knights, in which the Washington Capitals defeat the Golden Knights 3-2 in Vegas, in a game in which it really seemed as though the magic was gone out of that building, as a lot of those little plays that have been working for the Golden Knights just didn't go last night. What do you think, Eric?
Well, I just got to start off here by saying that Game 2 looked so much different than Game 1 for a variety of reasons. And we can start off by saying the first 10 minutes of Game 2 on Washington's side was completely different than the way they started in Game 1. You know, they started Game 2 of those first 10 much hungrier, skating much harder. It was almost an extension from the way they ended Game 1. And it was just great to see for Washington.
I would agree. It seemed as though they were a lot more responsible with the puck, especially early on. There were not a lot of those neutral zone turnovers that we'd had in Game 1. It seemed like Washington was skating a lot harder in the first period this time around. And I'll go back to some comments that Braden Holtby made after Game 1. He said that it was tough to recognize the Vegas forecheck. And I think anytime you're playing at this level in this league, and you don't see a team that often, which they played each other twice in the regular season, it's very difficult to know the kind of game they're going to bring. And Game 1 was a feeler game for both teams, and I think that was reflective in the score. 6-4 is not a common playoff hockey score, and I think both teams played a lot better defensively this time around, but those little plays, when it mattered, Vegas wasn't able to just turn them over on the Capitals as they were able to in Game 1. And we'd be remiss if we didn't get right in to the Braden Holtby save there with a minute left in the third period.
Huge. You know, it's funny, when he made that save, I myself thought it was in the back of the net. I think a lot of the Vegas crowd thought it was in the back of the net. I think the only one that didn't think it was in the back of the net was Doc Emrick with a huge save by Holtby.
Doc Emrick absolutely went off on that, and rightfully so. You rewatch that play, and you see, I mean, every person in that Vegas arena on their feet, they all thought it went in. And Braden Holtby comes up huge for his club, and this is just kind of the plays that you need out of a goalie in the playoffs. And I don't know if Braden Holtby makes that save 1 out of 100 times, but he did last night, and that's what's important. Braden Holtby said after the game that he was just trying to get a paddle on it, and he did. He got just a little bit of himself in it, and that's what it takes to make that huge save with a minute left. And that was one of those plays last night that it seemed like that was the play that Vegas should have scored on.
Yeah, and it was such a robbery save by Braden Holtby. And, you know, we've seen Braden Holtby make so many big saves throughout his career. But I think the thing that made this save so much different was that it was Game 2 of the Stanley Cup Finals with just 2 or 3 minutes left.
The magnitude.
And to come up that big, and I think John Carlson had touched on this a little bit, saying that, yeah, we've seen Braden Holtby make huge saves. I've seen him make saves equal, maybe even better than that. But for the whole landscape and the scope of how big of a save, when he needed to come up that big, he was able to do it with that kind of a save.
And when we go on a little bit about that save, like Eric said, the magnitude is really what makes that one special. And if Washington wins this series, we're really going to look back at this, and as they were saying last night on the broadcast, that will be referred to as the save, because it really was. And
to see Ovechkin's reaction over there on the bench after Braden Holtby made that stop, you know, he kind of just buries his face a little bit in his glove. You see his nose and his eyes peeking out. You know, he couldn't believe he made that save, and he's got to be relieved that Holtby did make that save.
That guy is so far bought in, and you know, it's interesting. It's like, you know, Ovechkin 10 years ago, does he even care that much, you know? But when you see the relief on that guy's face, it's got to bring a smile to any hockey fan's face. And we were talking a little bit before the show about who wants who to win in this Cup final, and I think a lot of the broadcast so far, especially on NHL Network, a lot of these big channels has been all about Vegas and the Cinderella story. But I for me, it's hard to imagine that people who've been following the sport for the last 10, 13 years of Ovechkin's career, how anybody could not want to see this guy win a cup. And this is, we say this every year, but this is the best chance, right? And it's always this year.
Well, and I think, for a lot of people, they feel like in years past, Alex Ovechkin didn't deserve to win the cup, mainly because it appeared as though he cares a lot about those individual awards, the scoring titles, things of that nature. And to see him, making plays, huge plays that don't involve scoring, diving, swatting the puck away, like we had mentioned, I think in our first podcast about how he just gets so excited now when his teammates are doing good. That's the sign of a leader, and that's the Alex Ovechkin I think people have been waiting for. And now that we're seeing it, you got to be excited. Whether you're a fan of Vegas or not, it's still good to see a legend. He's going to go down as a legend. He has to. One of the greatest. Some people may even say the greatest goal scorer of all time. Is to see the excitement level, to see what he's doing throughout this playoff run. This is what we've been waiting for. This is a Cindy Crosby looking Ovechkin, if that makes any sense.
I completely agree. It's a guy who's really picked his game up by its bootstraps, and when you watch him last year, 33 goals on the season. I mean, there were a lot of people calling for Ovechkin's getting older now. He doesn't have that spice in his step, and he comes right out this year, scores 49 goals, and leads his team in the Stanley Cup final. And we've got to touch on Evgeny Kuznetsov's injury and what that means for the Capitals. I think when you look back at the play, at game speed, it didn't look all that bad. It looked like an innocent play. But when you slow that one down a little bit, it was really peculiar to me to see McNabb leave his feet a little bit, raise that elbow up on Kuznetsov's face, and luckily Kuznetsov doesn't have a concussion from this. It looks to be a wrist injury, but you see a lot of these guys, the Don Cherry saying, good clean hit from Braden McNabb, and I just implore anybody listening to this to think about what would happen if Tom Wilson did that to Jonathan Marchessault, that exact play. Is that being looked at by Department of Player Safety?
And that's a great point. I think, Tom Wilson already is a villain throughout the league unless you're a Washington Capitals fan. So if he makes that play, especially on a guy the size of Marchessault, I think there's going to be some repercussion by the league, whereas McNabb is not going to get that repercussion. And, Evgeny Kuznetsov is a tough guy. He's not going to, embellish that, which we're going to get into that in a little bit, just the embellishment in its entirety. But, Kuznetsov is never going to embellish there. He was definitely hurt on the play. It looked like McNabb did leave his skates. And, as Keegan was saying, go back, take a look, see what you think, let us know. To us, it was a tad bit on the dirty side, even.
And we'll talk about that compete level last game, where the game before, the Ryan Reed's cross-check on John Carlson, I think anybody watching that from an unbiased view says that goal doesn't count. It doesn't count in the regular season, that's for sure. But unfortunately, it did count, and it was the eventual game winner for Vegas. But when we look at last night's game, Alex Tuch's penalty on John Carlson, they've been beating up John Carlson. And last night, Alex Tuch cross-checks John Carlson in the back again. The penalty's called this time. The refs are going to make it right 9 times out of 10. They're watching the same game we are, and they miss calls like anybody else. And I've got to preface this whole next section on saying how refereeing in the NHL is the hardest job in sports. The game is so fast. Things happen at lightning speed, and you really only have seconds to make a decision on what happened out there, and you got to stick to it. You got to stick to your guns. And last night we saw a lot of Vegas players blowing tires when they shouldn't. James Neal, the penalty on James Neal, the Brooks Orpik high hit to the head is what it was called. And when you rewatch that play, clean hit by Orpik, shoulder to shoulder, and James Neal's right arm punches himself in the face, and Brooks Orpik gets a high hit to the head. James Neal's sitting there checking his teeth, looking all sad to the referees. And that kind of stuff is, to me, is intolerable in the NHL. It's the same reason why I can't watch the sport of soccer. I'll watch soccer highlights all day long. I've got to give those athletes a ton of credit. They're incredible. They're in incredible shape, and I think what they can do really rivals any sport in the world. But when you see a guy get tapped and fall on the ground and have a seizing convulsion, because he was rubbed on the shoulder. That's the reason why the sport is unwatchable to guys like me. And we are only right down the road from that, allowing a team to do these kinds of things. And as a ref, it's hard to distinguish that. I have to make that clear. But we need to have some sort of video review on plays like that. There were 3 other penalties that we won't get into, which were extremely soft calls from an unbiased perspective on the Washington Capitals last night.
Well, yeah, like you had said, I want to get into one more penalty. I'll get into it here in a little bit. And, yes, the James Neal Brooks Orpik penalty right there.
It's just unfortunate. Really.
It is unfortunate, And of course, being a professional, you want to win the game. I don't blame the Vegas team, and I don't necessarily blame James Neal for what he did because he's looking to get that call. He wants to win the game. He's going to do what it takes to win that game. It's up to the referee. And again, these refs are super talented. I could not do what they do. Most people in this world could not do what they do. But I just think you just need to tighten up a little bit more on don't be afraid to call an embellishment penalty. And I think that's the thing. These refs are scared to call embellishment. But once you set that precedent that you're going to make those calls, I guarantee you we're going to see these players that are going to be playing a different type of game. They're not going to be checking their teeth after their own glove comes up and hits them in the face.
And fortunately, they did. They called one on Howla there, and to be honest, that was maybe the least egregious embellishment from the Vegas Golden Knights all night.
Right.
You watch that penalty, which I think we want to get into, the Orlov, the hooking against Ryan Carpenter. Orlov comes up from behind him, makes a beautiful stick play on his stick. I mean, I don't know if Orlov makes contact with Ryan Carpenter's body. Ryan Carpenter blows a tire, lets his feet come out from underneath him after he got stick checked, mind you, which doesn't happen to me in beer league, and he calls a huge penalty. And the Washington Capitals had to kill a 5-on-3 in the third period off of one, maybe arguably 2 soft calls back-to-back from the Vegas Golden Knights.
What I saw was a clean stick play by Dmitry Orlov. What else is he supposed to do in that kind of a play? Oh, come around, you'll get him from the side. Well, he didn't have enough time to do that. And I think with what he was working with, he made the play you should make in hockey. And I think we even heard some people saying it should have been a penalty shot. That is crazy. That should never be a penalty shot. And if you think it should, you need to go back and look at what a penalty shot is all about.
Some of the more clear penalty shots, exactly, that have been called in the history of the NHL. And I just want to distinguish that it's not the Vegas Golden Knights players' fault for selling calls, like you mentioned earlier. It's the referees buying them, which is the most unfortunate part. And anytime you're at this stage of the game, you're going to do what it is you have to do to win the game. In 10 years, in 20 years, if the Vegas Golden Knights win this Stanley Cup Series and they get 30 more calls like that, does anybody really remember the calls? No, they remember the winners' names on the cup. And to touch on that a little more, the little plays that are made in the game are all too often forgotten. But with all this said and all the adversity, this Washington Capitals team is really incredible to watch. And I'm not saying this as this is a little bit of a Capitals podcast today, but this team, they go down on the 5-on-3 in the third period with all these bad calls that have gone on in this game, and they kill it. I think there were 7 minutes left.
There were 7 minutes left, but to finish the embellishment series here, what I did like to see from the refs was in the third period, they were letting them play. They weren't buying when Vegas or when Washington, because I think Tom Wilson actually tried to get a little call there too, a little embellishment on his end, and the refs weren't falling for it in the third period. You either have to make calls or don't, in this stage. And I liked the adjustments the refs made in the third. They were letting them play. And yeah, going back to that 5-on-3, what a kill by Washington. That's a huge moment in the game. Maybe the biggest moment so far from games 1 and 2.
Well, certainly second biggest after Holtby's save.
That's right. Yeah, after we can't forget about Holtby's save. I know we mentioned it earlier, but yeah, I mean, that was great to see. But
It really the last 10 minutes from the Washington Capitals, from goaltending to defense to team buy-in, was really impressive this game. And to touch on
really all game.
Really all game, and to touch on that on the one thing that I said at the start of the podcast with the magic is gone, I want to expand on that a little bit. There was one play that Riley Smith made or tried to make in the second period in which he tried to do a little dipsy dangle around a defender, and the Washington guy just kind of stuck him up, and the puck was picked up by the other defender, and it at that moment, to me, it seemed like the magic was not working this night. And really, to have a season like the Golden Knights have had, you've got to have a lot of magic. And I would say that in hockey, I would rather take luck over skill any day, but that doesn't always win. And this Washington team is far more skilled than this extremely lucky and also, mind you, skillful Vegas Golden Knights team.
And from watching the Vegas Golden Knights throughout this playoffs, I would say last night, Game 2, was the most frustrated we've seen Vegas look. And I think that was leading to some of those calls. Again, we had talked about earlier, but they just looked frustrated out there. It looked like they couldn't keep up with Washington's physical play. And right off the bat, the first minute or two into the game, Ovechkin, I forget who it was, but just creams the guy into the boards. Clean hit, and that really set the stage for what was going to be a physical Washington Capitals game. And that's an adjustment that I guarantee you Barry Trotz went into that locker room after Game 1, said we need to play more physical. You're not going to beat these guys if you don't. Let's see how they respond to that kind of game. And Keegan, Vegas did not like that. They don't want to play a big man's game because they're just, sure, they have some big guys, but they play a speed, skill-based game. And Washington can play either or, and that's what makes Washington so tough to play against, because they can play a fast game as well, but they also can play a big man's game.
I fully second that, and I think when you look at who's on the Vegas Golden Knights roster, who their star player is Jonathan Marchessault. And let's compare the star players here for a second. You've got Alex Ovechkin, 6'3", 240 probably pounds, and you've got Jonathan Marchessault, who's not 6 foot and who is not 200 pounds. And when you press on a guy like Jonathan Marchessault, when you're hitting him every play, he's going to be less likely to make those huge magical plays, because in the playoffs you've got to lead with the body. You lead with that physical game. And when you look at the Vegas Golden Knights roster, you've got Ryan Reeves, huge guy, can play the physical game. Alex Tuch doesn't really lay the body as much as he should, but he can take the physical game, and that's where it about ends. You've got William Carrier, who's out right now, but if you put him in, you've got to take Reeves out, and that's not a trade I think they're willing to make at this stage. So you've got a Vegas team that, like you said, is a lot more dependent on that speed game. And what neutralizes speed better than physical aggression?
Well, I don't think that Reeves and Tuch and maybe a couple other of their bigger guys are out there. They're out there to protect their team, because Vegas is a smaller team. Vegas' skill guys are all relatively small guys, for being in the NHL. So you need at least 2, 3, 4 guys, bigger guys, to protect those guys. I don't think those bigger guys are there to play a full-blown physical, Vegas game, because that's just not their game style.
We've seen this all playoffs long, where the Capitals have played a fast and heavy game, and that's something that not a lot of teams have been able to do this offseason. This postseason. You've seen a lot of teams either play a heavy game, Anaheim, LA, did not work for them, or a fast game, LA or Vegas, which it has worked for them. But the Capitals all year, and all postseason especially, play a fast and heavy game, and that is a hard combination of two things to counteract.
Well, and I think they played maybe what was their most physical game because they had to last night in Game 2. In Washington, they don't always have to play that way, because they are a fast team and they are so skilled that, sure, they're always going to kind of lay the body, but they don't have to make that their number one priority, whereas I feel like last night it was. And through that being their number one priority, it just led to more chances. I had said in our last podcast that I felt like Vegas threw their speed, even though Washington was able to match their speed in game one after the first 10 minutes. I had said that I felt like Vegas had more room out there. They had more time with the puck, which was leading to them making better plays. And I feel like last night, Washington was the team that had more time with the puck, was able to make the better play, and which ultimately led to them winning the game.
We've got to retouch on something here. I don't think we did it any justice. The injury to Evgeny Kuznetsov, from an outsider's perspective looking in, may be something that a casual fan would think, this is the end of the Washington Capitals. You can't lose your top-line center.
Top point guy in the playoffs.
Top point guy in the playoffs. We saw what happened last year with Nashville and Ryan Johansson. You lose your top center, and that depth is gone.
Devastating.
Well, here is the beautiful thing about the Washington Capitals. They have a spare Evgeny Kuznetsov and Nicholas Backstrom, and they have a spare Nicholas Backstrom and Lars Eller. The problem, I think, for the Capitals is not going to be center depth. It's going to... If anything, it's not a problem for the Capitals. It's more or less a problem for the Vegas Golden Knights, because when Backstrom went out a couple of series ago, what happened? The Washington Capitals rallied around each other, and they all chipped in a little more, and it did not work out very well for the opposing team. So I think Lars Eller, he's been commented on everywhere in the last few days, or excuse me, in the last day, and Lars Eller has got to be tutored a little bit more, because this guy had a huge game, stepping up huge for his team, a goal, 2 points, that pass to Ovechkin, cross crease against Fleury, and we've got to get into the cross crease passing on Fleury. I think Fleury as a small goalie, you have really one option that you can play like in the NHL, and it's got to be far out.
Well, and just to touch on Lars Eller a little bit more here, in game one, we had talked about how Oshie was making those great passes, those great plays, and Lars Eller was that guy in game two, making those creative passes, finding the open man, that pass over to Alex Ovechkin. Of course, Ovechkin's going to bury that. He did. Fleury actually did get a piece of that, but it wasn't enough. It was in the back of the net. And, to comment on Fleury's style of goaltending, he's a goalie that is going to come out of his crease on every shot and come out far, that is. I mean, he may come out further than any goalie in the league. He likes to leave that crease. He cuts down angles that way. It's very tough to beat him as a shooter one-on-one. You have to make that pass if you want to score more than one or two goals a game on that guy.
And it looks as though the Capitals have not necessarily figured that out, because we're not sharing any new information with them that they didn't already know. But the Capitals are playing the right way against Fleury. And I mentioned this in our first podcast. The Fleury's numbers against the Capitals are not stellar. We look at Fleury's .950 heading into this series, and now it's looking like a 900, or I think it may even be sub 900 right now. Fleury is not. It's not that he's not playing good hockey. Fleury is tremendous. He's still coming up huge. There was a deflection shot early in the first period, and how many goalies really have that save? Not many.
And he made it look effortless. It was a deflection that should have went in. I don't know how he made it look so easy, but he did.
That's the magic. That's the magic of Marc-Andre. It's not that he's having a bad series so far against the Capitals. The Capitals are for real this year.
They're doing what they need to do to score on him. They're scoring every which way, too. Not only are they passing the puck well and making those cross-crease passes, but they're also, and I actually want to see Washington do a little bit more of this, but they're also, shooting from the point and getting traffic in front of Fleury. But I think they need to do a little bit more of that even. I think the way to score on Fleury is deflections. It's crisp passing. Sure, Patrick Laine, Alex Ovechkin may be able to pick, a goal on him here and there, but you're not going to win the series relying off your shooters just flinging pucks at Marc-Andre Fleury. You need to score on him in other ways.
That's exactly right. In the playoffs, it's not about the pretty goal, and I think far too often in the playoffs so far, at least with the Vegas run, we've seen them score those pretty goals. I mean, that one from old Wild Bill Carlson there on Martin Jones is one of the more iconic ones for me, where he just shoots this puck from the blue line, it seems, across Martin Jones's body and just picks that corner. Those are going to go in less and less as we get deeper into this series here. You've got to score the ugly ones, and that's something I think the Capitals have been good at, is scoring that hard-working goal. And this team is working really hard, and moving forward, the Capitals have to keep up this hard work. They've got to keep playing their game, sticking to the passing, and I think for Vegas, obviously there's no panic from this squad here.
We've talked this whole podcast about what a great game Washington played. But the scary thing is, and if you're a Vegas fan, the thing with it is, yes, Vegas looked a little bit more frustrated out there. They weren't making quite as good of plays as they did in game one. But with all that being said, Vegas still played a heck of a game, which is scary. Even when they have an off night, it's still a one-goal game. They still put themselves in a position to win. And you have nothing to be worried about if you're a Vegas fan. It's so hard to predict this series. It could go either way. I think we're going to just keep seeing this back and forth, back and forth. Whatever team has the slightly better night that night is going to be the team that wins. And that's true with just about every NHL game. That's why it's so much fun to watch. But I think it's even with these two teams,
almost every situation here moving forward is likely. Washington wins 3 straight, likely. Vegas wins three straight, likely. Them trading games, win to loss, that's also likely. There is no, this is not the NBA where there is no parity and we know who's going to be in the finals every year. We have no idea what's going to happen. I think we did some predictions, our first 2. I'm done with predictions. I'm tired of it. I kind of just want to comment on where the game is, what we've been seeing, and so far it's been an incredibly action-packed series. If you're not watching this, I implore you to tune in to this series and to watch these two teams duke it out here. Saturday night at Capital One Arena, we have Game 3 between the Washington Capitals and Vegas Golden Knights, 8 o'clock, NBC Sportsnet. And if you haven't seen any of the games or if you've only seen a little bit of them, tune in. This is the best hockey of the year, the best sport to watch in the world. And as always, guys, thanks anybody for tuning in and listening to this episode of Idiots Talk Sports, and enjoy the rest of the series. Have a great day.